just so we have it. What I'd like to do, because I give other shiurim, and I really benefit from the recordings because I could review it at a later point in time, especially this Masechta. I'm planning on reviewing it every year. Like what I learned so far in my life now, I'm always reviewing everything. I'm not just learning to move on, I'm learning it to actually remember it, to review it. So the recording really helps. We have a whole channel actually, Baruch Hashem, someone uploads it for us. We have a whole channel. So the Gemara, though, could be a lot of back and forth, could be very into it. But what I want to do is I want to do like a short overview of the page of Talmud, of one side of Talmud, and then record that. And then we can have a long discussion afterwards. I'll stop the recording and we can have a long discussion afterwards. At least it'll give you some background. So I want to just share a couple things about, and we'll get started. I want to share a couple things about the Gemara. We're learning tractate Saita. The reason we're doing this again is because Alter Rebbe said that everyone should take a Masechta, a tractate of Talmud on themselves, and between everyone together, we complete the whole Talmud. So our goal is to try our best to get through as much of the tractate Saita this year as much as we can. We took on ourselves to learn half of Saita, committed to it. So we're among, and then at the end of the year, when it comes Yotas Kislev, in a year from now, we will make a siyum together with the rest of New Jersey. Everyone took another Talmud, and we'll make a siyum together. Menashe and I, Baruch Hashem, did it last year with 33 pages in the Talmud Bava Kama. So we did it. We did the trial, and we're gonna. What? We didn't record it. No, we weren't. We were doing Taisvus. We're figuring it out. It's like a kind of work in progress. Now figuring out how to do it. The Rebbe highly encouraged people to learn this, to study this there's 49 pages of Talmud in this tractate, to study this between Pesach and Shavuos. So I'm hoping every year to actually learn this between Pesach and Shavuos. Okay, now let me move on and those who are learning Talmud for the first time, just write on questions that we need to understand, ask me, right? If there's questions that are on the page, please ask me. Otherwise, we're going to review it. We're going to give an overview, and then we're going to review it, and we're going to talk about it later. I just want to give you an overview to Saita. Saita is a woman who's a suspected adulteress, okay? So what happens is, in the very basic case, the husband tells the wife, he doesn't like what's going on. The wife is flirting and talking to other men that you shouldn't be talking to, and the husband is suspicious that something is going on between his wife and another man. And to talk to mommy because Tati's giving a class now. I'm middle of a. Okay, so there's a suspected adulteress, and he doesn't trust his wife. So he goes over to his wife and he says, "Listen, I don't want you hiding with this guy. I don't trust you anymore." And if she does go and hides with that man, it's a very serious class time. So if the kids could be away, it would be very good. Wow, with the money, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, so the suspected adulteress. So he tells his wife, "I don't trust you, and don't hide with him. I don't want you secluded with this man anymore." And she goes and she's in a quiet room with this man for long enough. Now there's a major problem that comes up over here because she cannot stay married to her husband anymore after this point in time. And the Gemara is going to tell us there's a very unique potion made, which we'll learn later on in the Talmud. We'll learn later on in the Gemara. There's a very unique potion that's made, and they give her to drink, and that potion can tell you if she is cheated or she didn't cheat. If she cheated, she'll die, and the guy she cheated with will also die. It's a miraculous spiritual potion, and if she didn't die, if she didn't cheat, then tremendous blessings will come her way. The potion will be a blessing for her instead of a sickness. Just to give you an overview of the idea. So the first topic, the Mishnah, by the way, often the Mishnah and Gemara do not work in an organized fashion as much as we're used to in Jewish law. In other words, it's not starting from the beginning. It's going to go smack into the middle of this case and discuss a topic that is an interesting question. And the question is going to be a debate here. We're actually going to start right away with a debate. And the debate is going to be how many witnesses you need in order to establish, okay, right? Talmud discusses the nuances of law that for those that are new to it. The debate is going to be how many witnesses are required in order for the woman to be warned. In other words, does there have to be witness there for the woman to be warned? And B, does there have to be witnesses there when the husband actually catches his wife, in the secluded room? Does there have to be witnesses there? How many witnesses are needed? And it gets into an interesting law of witness. And the Gemara is going to venture into very interesting conversations from this, but we're going to start from the Mishnah together over here. Okay, so we have the word Hamakana. I'm going to actually, I think I could even point here with my spotlight in the Gemara. Let's see if we're able to do this. Okay. Hamakana. Someone somebody is, in the Hebrew, really, the word is usually masra. Somebody warns. Hamasra, somebody ends up warning his wife, li'ishtoi, to his wife, right? The big word in the box is hamasra, and then he's masra li'ishtoi, he warns his wife. Warns his wife. So he came and he ended up warning his wife. He didn't like what was going on, and he says, I'm warning you, don't be together with this man. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, so the Tana, means in the Mishnah, this is the first section is the Mishnah. Those are Tanoim, people who lived from the year 100, from 1 to 200. They were the authors of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the Tana, which means he lived during the time period of the Mishnah, authors of the Mishnah, says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Mekane la al pi shnayim. He warns her. He's masra, based on two people. So he has two people next to him. And he says, I'm warning you. I'm telling you, I don't like what's going on. I do not want you and this guy that I'm suspecting you. I don't want you and this guy to be together, to hang out together. And he says it in front, Mekane la al pi shnayim. And he warns her based on two witnesses there. So there has to be two witnesses to start. Umashka, and then when he wants to make her drink, which means he came to the period in time where she went and actually cheated with the man, and now he's going to force her to drink from that potion. Al pi eid echad could be even based on one witness. In other words, one guy. Usually in Torah we need two, but here he already did the warning. And what is the one witness going to do? It's not going to kill her. It's going to tell her that she cannot stay married to her husband until she drinks the potion. You're suspected. One witness is enough to enter the stage of a suspected adulteress once there has been already two witnesses that have come in that's seen the warning. Or even based on his own testimony. In other words, he comes to the court. He says, I had two witnesses there when I originally suspected my wife. And now I saw her. I comes to court. This woman is now not allowed to live with her husband anymore. Can't live with her husband anymore, even if it's his own saying. And she, until she drinks the water, she's now in a status of suspected adulteress. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua, another great Tana, another great author of the Mishnah, Omer says, I disagree. I agree with your first statement. Mekane la al pi shnayim. He warns her based on the testimony of two. Correct, that the warning has to be done in front of two. However, umashke, like we learned mashke, that's what we're talking about. Mashke drinks, al pi shnayim, also based on two witnesses. You cannot have one witness or yourself to force her to separate until she drinks the water. To remove the marriage from her, you need to have two witnesses there at the beginning of the procedure and at the end of the procedure that actually sees her go into a room with another man. So that is fact number one of our Mishnah. So there's a debate between two great tzaddikim, two great Tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. And what do they argue? They both agree that there has to be two witnesses. Okay, again, a major study of law is that there has to be two witnesses to the warning of the husband to the wife. But there's a debate. Rabbi Eliezer says that you don't need two witnesses to actually catch her hiding with the man. The husband comes and says, I caught her, I saw it, or we have only one witness. Even though usually we don't trust one witness, this is enough that now you have to separate until you drink from the water. Shua says, no, one is not enough to force her to separate from her husband and to force her to drink the water. There's got to be two witnesses. And that is the end of step number one in our Mishnah. Continuing along. The Mishnah says, Keitzad mekane la. How does he warn her? What is the procedure? How does it take? So, Omer la bifnei shnayim, if he tells her, if the warning is don't speak to this guy, and this happens sometimes, right? Unfortunately, this is something you can understand. The guy doesn't like the way his wife is speaking to other men. Omer la bifnei al tedabri, Omer la bifnei shnayim, he says to her before two people, al tedabri and ish ploini, don't speak to this guy. I don't trust you and this guy. To the stranger, yeah, she's talking too much to this guy. The husband doesn't like it. The husband says, "Don't talk to stranger." And she goes and she violates. She goes against her husband and she speaks to him. No problem. Mishnah says that's not a problem. Adayin still, he muteres. She's mutter. She's allowed. She's open. She's allowed to go to the base back home. She's allowed to stay married, even though she violated what her husband said. And not just that. And he says an interesting law about a kohen, that the marriage is still so solid. She could continue. She's mutter. She's allowed to eat the truma, to eat the kohanic food. Because what happens if the girl's not a kohen, right? She's not. No one's allowed to eat truma. But if you're married to a kohen, you're allowed to eat truma. So since the marriage is still strong. There, in other words, the woman has to separate from her husband. If it would be a case where he would have to separate from each other, the husband and wife would need to separate from each other, then she would not allowed to eat truma anymore. The only reason this woman who's not a kohen is allowed to eat truma because she's married to a kohen. But if she now has to separate from her husband, then she's not allowed to eat truma anymore. But this woman, the husband only said to her, don't speak to the guy, and she spoke to the guy, and there's nothing wrong with her speaking to guys. It's not a violation of anything, no problem. Where is the violation? Where the husband told her, continuing right along, the husband said, don't seclude yourself with this guy. And nichnesa imoy, and she went in with him, lebeis haseiser, she went in with him into a hiding house. And how long was she there for? Vishasa imoy shata. She waited there, kidei tuma, enough for the tuma, for the impurity to take place, enough time, the minimum amount of time for the deed of intimacy, of impurity to take place. As soon as that happens, asura lebeisa, she's usher to her house. She's not allowed to be married anymore. That's the case where we call a warning of a husband to a wife, which prohibits her from staying married to him. But asura lechol betruma, and she's prohibited from eating the truma. She's not allowed to eat the kohanic food anymore, because at that point she was warned not to hide with that guy, and she hid with the guy. At that point, she's not allowed to stay married to him. She's not allowed to eat the truma anymore if she's married to a kohen. And he brings one more interesting case to show how the marriage is really disintegrated once it hits that period that she hid with a guy that she was told not to hide. The imace, what happens if the husband died? So they never had a chance to figure things out, because they didn't give her the water yet. They would give her the potion, but they never gave her the potion yet. But the problem is, if it's an interesting case, let's tell you what the case is. There's an interesting rule, when we spoke about this in our Chumash class, that a husband a man who has no children, the wife has to marry the younger brother to reconnect, is automatically married to him. Here, the problem was that she committed this whole atrocity that she hid with another guy, and we didn't know what happened. And then the husband died before they had a chance to give her the potion to check out if she was wrong or not. Chaylet says she must then go through the divorce process, which is called chalitza, with the younger brother. She's not allowed to marry him. She's not allowed to marry him because her marriage with the original man was already kind of absolved, was in an unhealthy state, was already partially absolved because she already was not allowed to live with him. So she does not enter in automatically to the younger brother and marry him. She has to go through the chalitza process for this reason. That is no connection to the parasha. This is just learning the laws of things. Right? Tamar, we have a story with Tamar, and Tamar, but over there we said an interesting case in the first, you're right, we had this just in the Chumash the other day, this past week. In those days, we're going into the Chumash now, it's a whole other case. In those days, according to some of the commentaries, Yibum was allowed even to a father-in-law. It's an interesting commentary that we learned, which is why it was halachic grounds for her ability to marry her father-in-law. But there was no case over there of suspected adultery. It wasn't a case of suspected adultery there. It's a totally different case. They didn't have divorce, right? Correct. It was totally different. It was different. It's interesting that we mentioned this in last week's parsha, but it's a totally different case. So just to recap, we had a debate. What happened so far? We had a debate between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehoshua. We have to learn the names. Rabbi Elazar says you need to have two witnesses to warn her and two witnesses and only one witness or himself to see her actually doing the act. And then we had Rabbi Yeshua said, no, you have to have two witnesses in the beginning and the end. And then we asked the question, well, how does the warning work? And we said it does not work if you say don't speak to this man and she speaks to the guy, then nothing has happened. If the husband says don't be alone in a secluded area with this man, and she does enough time to there, she's automatically at that point considered already partially divorced or not. She's not allowed to be intimate with her husband.
It doesn't say that he warns her.
It doesn't say that. I'm adding that. I'm adding that based on the commentaries that I saw. Correct. I'm already giving you, that would be a good discussion for after. You're right. You're 100% right. I'm adding that, I guess, based on listening to Rabbi Zions's class, and he knows from the Gemara or something. Correct. I'm not 100. It's an interesting point. I would discuss. Let's discuss that after. It's a good question, actually. We should have pen and paper, write stuff down to discuss after. But let's move on. So the Gemara asks an interesting question and nothing to do with the topic at hand, but you're going to see how the Gemara is like a conversation. It flows from topic to topic. So the Gemara is going to ask, look to the question. Michti Tana Minazar Salik. What's happening here is the Tana, the Mishnah is finished learning what was the last tractate that we learned. What was the previous section in Talmud, right? I have the book over here, actually. It's all in one book even. The previous tractate was a tractate of Nazir, was a Nazirite, right? When someone wants to not cut his hair and wants to abstain from eating grapes, that was the whole topic. What? Not to drink wine, right? So that was the whole topic of the previous. I have it right over here. There was like 60, 70, 66 pages over there. That was the whole topic on Nazirite. So the Gemara says, my Tana, what did he learn in the previous tractate, in the previous section of Talmud, the Katana Saita that he's deciding to talk about a Saita? How did this fall into our lap to all of a sudden talking to Saita? You were talking about a Nazirite, and then from a Nazirite, you go into Saita. Come on, what's the connection between the two? What is the connection between the two tractates? There's got to be some combination. That's an interesting question that the Gemara is asking. The Gemara says, Kid Rebbe, we see that Rebbe spoke about this. Rebbe is the author of the Mishnah, and he spoke about this in a brisa. That we see that he spoke about the connection. The Tanya Rebbe Omer. We learned that Rebbe says, Rebbe, by the way, is the author of, he's the publisher of the Mishnayos, okay? He's the one who published the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah and so on. He says, Rebbe says, Lama, why? He asks this exact question. The Gemara says in the brisa. Brisa is, is the leftovers of the Mishnah. So the Mishnahs were written between the year 1 to 200, and they put the footnotes of all the Gemara. And Brisas are similar to Mishnah, which was published between about the year 1 to 200, and it was like extra clarity added that was not enough added in the original Mishnahs. The Talmud will then be published between about the years 200 for another 270 years. Let's just say roughly 200, 300 years. The Talmud, the Gemara will then be published. So the Gemara is asking a question. The Talmud is asking a question. What's the connection between the tractate of Nazir, of Nazirite, to the tractate of Saita, to the suspected adulteress? What's the connection? The Gemara says we have a brisa. We have already published from the author of the Mishnayos from Rebbe that he says the Tanya Rebbe. We're learning a brisa. Rebbe says, "Lama nismecha machanala." Miriam is disturbing the class. Can you please take her away? Lama nismecha parshas Nazir the parsha Saita. He asks this question. Rebbe himself says, why is it close, the Torah portion, the parsha of Nazir, to the parsha of Saita? I guess in the Chumash, why is there a connection between the two? I guess that's the case. Why is they connected? To teach you. Shakol haroya Saita. There's a lesson here, the connection that anyone who sees a Sota, bikilkula, a suspected adulteress in her kilkul, in her disgusting scenario, because they would tie, Rashi says, like we'll see in the Gemara, it was a very low, sad state to see the person in, that they would unkempt her hair and they would tie a rope around her as she would die, with her stomach would explode, whatever, so on. We'll see about that. So whoever is lucky enough or unlucky enough to experience the view and the sight and be involved in a soita, in a suspected adulterous situation, Yazir atzmoi min hayayin, he should make a decree that he's going to abstain from wine. Whoever is, and Hashem sends people messages in life. And if you see a message where somebody is a suspected adulteress, you should take on yourself the extra obligation not to drink wine. Okay, so I believe he said that some commentaries say literally become an Nazirite, or others say no, just be more careful with your drinking because, or don't drink, because drinking could bring you to a very, very, a lot of problems happen when people are drunk, bad things come. So the fact that you saw this woman in her disgusting state, you should take a lesson too, and you should be a little more careful with the foods and drink that you eat. Shouldn't drink as much alcohol and wine, because it'll lead you to this thing. It's a message from Hashem that you shouldn't drink as much wine. And that now is the connection between Nazirite and Saita, between the Nazirite person and the suspected adulteress, the connection that the Talmuds are next to each other, because they tell you that if you ever talk about see a suspected adulteress, you should become a Nazirite. Mara says, it's an interesting lesson. Okay, that's interesting. That's the connection between Nazirite. Wow, you found an interesting connection between a Nazirite and a suspected adulteress. Well, then it should have been the opposite order, he says, right? It shouldn't have been Nazirite and then the suspected adulteress. It should have been the other way around. You should have had the Gemara first talk about the Talmud suspected adulteress and then talk about the tractate of Nazirite. It should have been, you're right, they should be next to each other, but it should have been in the other order. First talk about the Saita, first talk about the suspected adulteress, and then we should not drink wine. So Nazirite should come after. Listening Saita, V'hader listening Nazir. So first teach the Saita, and then teach the case of Nazir. So the Gemara says, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do the tractate of Soita before the tractate of Nazir. Because the snug kisubais, I had to follow the Nazirite Talmud to the flowing of the earlier tractates. Because first it was talking about the tractate of women of Ksubais, of how Ksuba, which is a marriage document, how it's made. At the end of that tractate called Ksubas, which spoke about the marriage document that a husband gives his wife when they get married, the guarantees and everything that a husband makes for his wife. There's a whole tractate about that. At the end, the Tana Hamadir, at the end of that, Talmud, the last tractate in that section of Talmud called Ksubas, it says Hamadir, a case where a husband makes promises about a wife or so on. So therefore, it followed that tractate, Tana Nadarim. It taught what followed the tractate of Ksubas. Again, it flowed from Ksubas, from a woman's rights in marriage to her, which is called a Ksuba, her marriage document. The last section in that Talmud spoke about promises. So it went from there to Nadarim to speak about all kinds of promises that a person makes. Then I did the Tana Nadarim, and then once it followed the tractates of promises, Tana Nazir went to Nazirite. Nazirite flows after Nadarim makes sense to Dami the Nadarim because it's close to promises. A Nazirite makes a promise, makes a commitment, so it makes sense. It went from Ksubas, from marriage documents of a husband to wife, finishing off talking about the promises of a husband and wife. From there, it went to talk about tractates of all kinds of promises that a person makes. From there, it went to the case of Nazirite, which is a kind of promise and commitment that a person makes. And then after that, Katani Saita went to talk Saita like Rebbe says. So get it? Basically, it couldn't teach Saita before Nadarim before Nazirite, because Nazirite came from Nadarim, came from promises, and promises came from Ksubas. So that had to flow. Ksubas to promises to Nazirite, and then we even though we couldn't teach the Talmud of Saita before, but we said at least make it right next to Nazirite, and we put Saita right next to Nazir to tell you that if you ever see a woman in her suspected adulterous state, you should not drink wine. So we stuck Saita after Nazir. Is that clear, or it's totally not clear what I'm saying? Or it's somewhat clear? Zeb, you with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you with me?
Yeah. Clear.
Okay, fine, but save it after. Let's go through it, and then we're gonna go. I want you to get a taste. It's good to get to see what's going on, and then we're gonna go over the Gemara. We'll discuss everything after. And that's the end of that topic. Okay, so what did we just do? What did the first section of the Gemara, like 7-8 lines, just do? Very interesting. It asked the question: why is it in order of this section of the Talmud? Fascinating question. Fascinating answer, fascinating lesson that a person who ever sees someone as a divine promise, you see a woman as a suspected adulteress, you should not drink wine. Now we're going to move on to another very interesting topic, but very short to be discussed. Just a couple lines. Is it good? This is the question. A very interesting question is going to be discussed later in the Talmud. Is it good for a husband to warn his wife not to speak to men because he's protecting her? Or is this a bad thing? Should a husband not be warning his wife? Because you know what's going to happen when you warn him there's nothing going on, you're going to make a bigger fight between the husband and the wife. So we're going to try to figure out much more later in the Talmud, but there's going to be a two-liner here that's going to approach this topic. Do we like this? Is this encouraged for husbands to walk around saying, don't go with that man, don't go with that man? Or is this just a sad situation that the husband and wife are really not having a good marriage and it happened and now we got to just deal with the consequences? So the Gemara says, I want to prove from our Mishnah's wording that it is a negative thing. A husband should not be warning their wives. And it's just, how do I know? From the Hebrew, hamekane. It says, if a man ended up warning his wife, hamekane is the Hebrew term for, like in the past tense, like he already did it. Not telling you, tikane, or you should be mekane. It doesn't use that expression. Our author of our Mishnah was very deliberate and specific. And he wrote, a guy ended up warning his wife, which indicates the avad, which means it was after the fact. It wasn't really it's unadvisable, but it was done. So now what do we do? The avad in the chatchilim loy. The avad means b'diavad, means it's after the fact. What are you going to do? B'diavad is some mezuzahs kosher. After the fact, it's kosher, but you shouldn't really write mezuzahs like that. You just had a tefillin case like that. But the chatchila to begin with loy. It's not the whole scenario of our case is talking about a man did this to his wife, but this should not be done. This is not healthy and this is not really recommended. This is the style case of our author of our Mishnah is indicating that he actually doesn't like it. He doesn't think it should be done. Kasavar, he holds Tana Didan, our Tana, that Osir Lekanis, it's prohibited to warn your wife. And we're only dealing with the after effects. So there's another topic, interesting topic our Gemara touched upon. He's zooming into the wording of the author of our Mishnah, and he says, I want you to know that it's implied from the author of our Mishnah that men should not be warning their wives, and this is an after effect case. Okay, and that is the end of section number 2. So 2 sections so far. Number 1 was, why is the order of Saita after Nazir? And section number 2 is, if a husband warns his wife, it not should be done. We're only talking about an after the fact case. Now the Gemara is going to get into an interesting Gemara. Okay, it's going to get it's going to get more like medrash, more like story-like kind of thing. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak said, "Ki havi pasach reish lakish." So Shmuel bar Yitzchak is one famous rabbi in the Talmud, and another famous Tana is Reish Lakish. By the way, Reish Lakish used to be a bandit, used to be a robber, and it's a whole other story, which maybe we'll talk about after the class if I want to share with you. He became one of the greatest scholars of the Talmud. Pasach, he began, whenever he would start talking about this topic, Reish Lakish, this rabbi whose name was Reish Lakish, Besoita, with a suspected adulteress, whenever he would start teaching in yeshiva, let's talk about the case of Sota, talk about suspected adulteress. Amar Hachi, this is what he would say. He had a very interesting take. This is, in other words, a lot of times they would start the class not going straight into the meat and potatoes of the law. He would go with something interesting. So this is what he says. Very interesting. He says, Ein mizavgin loy adam. We don't make a match to a person. Isha, a wife. We don't match up with a man, a wife. Ella lefi maisa. Only according to his actions, which means you marry who you are. Whatever you deserve, that's what you get. Hashem is going to match up whatever you deserve, that is what you get. Now, what's the connection to the early piece of Gemara? Because the guy who's warning his wife for hanging out with the wrong woman, you want to know something? He's really a problem. In other words, it's not just that the woman's a problem. Hashem matches people up based on their actions. So it's not just that the guy has a wife who's a cheater, but he himself is a cheater. In other words, it's really, that's the connection between the four, is that he himself probably is not the most kosher person, and that's why he married, and he has a person, because Hashem hooks you up, connects you. It's called a hitch. You get hitched to the same train that matches the same tracks that you're going on, right? You get hitched up to the train, to the same one that matches your accident. And he says, how do I know this from? Rabbi Reish Lakish says, where do I know this from? I got to find the pasuk in Torah. He says, Shenemar, because it says in Tilim, David HaMelech writes in the end of the Tilim, 25th chapter, it says, God would never make a tzaddik live together with the same portion as an evil person. Ki loy, because no Yenuach Shevet HaRasha will not dwell. Shevet, the husband, HaRasha of the portion of the evil. And one second, I just wrote down the translation. Shevet is the Isha, the wife. The wife will not dwell, an evil wife, al goyrel hatzadikim, on the lottery of the tzadikim. So I guess when the husband's screaming at his wife, you're such a wicked person, it's impossible that you're not a wicked person yourself, because Hashem would not make, David HaMelech says, a tzaddik man get married to a wicked woman. It must be that she's a wicked person too. So we see that even though this guy is here cursing out his wife and telling his wife, don't hide with the guy, he's telling you that everybody matched up is matched to the same character as your person. And therefore, the guy's bad too. And we see this of Melch writes that Hashem will never make a tzaddik and a tzaddik be forced to live with a rasha, and therefore it's going to match up to the actions. That's what he says. Amar, and because of that, because of the statement that Hashem is so magical that he can make the people be identical in their personality, in their level of observance and wickedness and holiness. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, so another scholar whose name is Rabba Bar Chana, the son of Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That's why it says something very interesting. Another verse in Tehillim. It says V'kashin L'zavka. Kashin means it's hard. L'zavka, to match them up, to make a match matched up. You want to know how hard it is for God to make a match? You want to know how big it is? Kikriyas Yamsuf, like the splitting of the sea. It means as great of a miracle as it is to split the sea. That's how great the miracle is when Hashem makes a shidduch, a match to each other. That's the miracle, because it's impossible. How are you going to find two people that are identical to each other? So it's a magic. It's the greatest magic trick if you're saying that the two people that need to match up to each other need to be identical, you want to know how hard it is to find two people that are matching the same level. So he says it's as hard as Kriyas Yamsuf. It's a splitting the sea. This is a miracle. It's the same crazy level, amazing level as splitting the sea. Shenamar, and he brings a verse to show that matching people is the same extreme as splitting the sea. Elikim, it says in a verse, Elikim Moishiv Yechidim Beisa. It says in the verse that Hashem in Tehillim. This is what it says in Tehillim. Hashem Moishiv sits down together. Yechidim, single people. Baisa into a house. Hashem sits down single people to one house. He puts two single entities into one family, one house. And Moitzi, in the same verse where it talks about the greatness of God matching up two singles, Moitzi, he brings out Asirim, the prisoners, B'koisharais in the right time, which means the prisoner needs to stay in jail exactly to the right time where he needs to stay. Or in here is referring to the Jewish people, I believe, also leaving Egypt in the right proper weather. So we're equating the same skill as having a prisoner come out in exactly the time the prisoner needs to leave, and the Jewish people leaving in the beautiful weather, to Hashem matching up prisoners, to matching up single people to get married together. And therefore, again, we see a verse, that we see that it's very, very, very difficult, very amazing skill, and therefore it's a magnificent miracle of Hashem matching up two people to the same level as splitting of the sea. That's how great the miracle is, because based on the earlier statement that Hashem matches people up to match identically to who you deserve. Very interesting. So the Gemara's questions this premise, very interesting questions. Gemara says, wow, you want to tell me that that's how marriages are made? That God finds a man, God finds a woman. He says, wow, there's a million different levels, and this guy's at level 100,092, and she's at level 100,092, and he matches them up. Inni, is this really so? We learned, this is how the Gemara works. We learned an opposite statement. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, didn't the great sage Rabbi Yehuda say, Amar Rav, in the name of the great sage Rav, right? I guess Rav and Shmuel. Rav is the first one of the Amaraic scholars who lived in Babylonia. He says an opposite statement. Arbayim Yoim, 40 days. Koidem Yitziras Havlad, before the formation of the baby is born. 40 days before the formation, the baby's formed, because it takes 40 days for the baby to be formed, to become an entity, right? It exists already. We have all these questions. When does birth? When is abortion? When is there a baby here? But look what he says. So in halacha, there are some stances for it. I'm not talking about that really. I'm showing you that before the baby's even formed, Bas kol, a voice comes out of heaven, a voice comes out. Yoitzes comes out, Vayimeres, and it says, as soon as it happens, Bas ploini leploini, the daughter of so-and-so to so will marry so-and-so. So who are you going to marry? You're not even born yet. You're 40 days before you even came into being formed in the uterus. And a heavenly voice comes out and says, this guy's going to marry this woman, which means soulmates. So it's destiny. It's predestined and destiny. Who are you going to marry? And not just, by the way, is who you're going to marry predestined, which is going to question our premise of our Gemara that you get who you're matched up. Is it predestined or is it your actions? By is plain. We also say it's predestined. Where are you going to live? Like I see the house I live now. I didn't want to move. I was forced kind of into it. So because that's where Hashem knows you're going to live. And not just that, stay plainy. This field is going to go to this person. All these things in life are all predestined. The only thing that's not predestined is how you're going to react. Your Yiras Shamayim, your fear of heaven, that's not predestined. But who you're going to marry is predestined. House you're going to live in, which field, basically, just meaning your business. All this stuff is predestined. Before you even came into this world, it was all predestined. So the question is, what's the question he's asking? How can you tell me that Hashem matches up people to exactly the same level as each other when we have a very clear statement from Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav that it's all soulmates, it's all predestined? But that's a very interesting answer. Like Kasha, it's not a question. This one is your first marriage, which means it's a soulmate, it's predestined who you're going to marry. And this one is with your second partner. So if you're going to go through a second marriage, then you're going to get what you deserve. Then Hashem's going to match it up to beautiful. So you always have the soulmate. And the soulmate is who it's supposed to be. But God forbid, if the soulmate dies or divorce happens and you get married a second time, so you're right, there's two conflicting statements. How does he answer the contradiction? Not a problem. The soulmate, predestined destiny of your life, who your partner needs to be. The other half of your soul, who you need to marry, is determined before. This is determined after. Save any questions for later, and then we'll go on from there. Oh, that's it. That's Raziv Shir. That's Reimer. That's it. We're gonna leave it. We're gonna leave the Gemara here. We're almost done by the bottom line, and now we'll take any questions or comments that you might have.